Hi, this is Geoff Berry, and welcome to the Nature Calling channel, where we aim to deepen connection to the earth and to the spirit of life and to all our kin on this beautiful planet.
Alrighty, well, thanks so much for joining me today, Claire Dunn.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Geoff.
Yeah, it's great to talk again. As we were just reminiscing before we came on to record, we were spending some time together. I had not realised how long ago now. It would have been about 2015 or 16. We were trying to get up that Australian version of the Schumacher College. Which was going to be a small is beautiful eco-everything course, college place.
Applied everything.
And of course, you came into it. I came into that from that eco-psychology background, but you came into it following your first book, My Year Without Matches, which, you know, I and everyone I knew had read or were reading at the time. But now we're in 2022, and your next book that has come out since seems really, really helpful to the general space that I want, to keep presenting in and working in, is ecotherapy. And actually, I should probably thank you for writing that book so that I don't have to I don't have to talk about that stuff anymore, because it's a big question.
Sure.
In ecotherapy and eco-psychology. And it came up for me when I was really training in the philosophical side of it back at Monash. And someone said, we were all talking about getting back to nature in the ecological humanities. And, and that kind of qualification came up, which was like, well, not everyone can. Like, it's slightly elitist and privileged to be able to do so. I'm very thankful that I've always had that privilege to have nature really accessible to me, but also, it would just be practically impossible. So the idea of how we do ecotherapy, no matter where we are, is super important. And I feel like that's what you did with that book, but I'll let you speak to it.
Yeah, no, it was coming from a need from myself initially. Here I found myself in the city after, living in the bush and regional areas for most of my life. And feeling like I had two choices. One was to resign myself to kind of being shut off or shut down or disconnected in the city and kind of, perch there until I could make another leap out into the wilds.
Not acceptable. I'm feeling, even in the body language as you explained it, I'm like, there's no way that's acceptable to Claire.
Well, it wasn't acceptable to me because I want to live a connected life in all the ways. And so I decided to go on this kind of adventure or experiment of how can I live a connected life in the city, connected to a sense of ecological literacy and connection to my life support systems and elements and more than human world, as well as to community, as well as to self, that kind of trifecta of earth, self and other. And so that formed the basis of this book, Rewilding the Urban Soul, which talked of my journey experimenting in that realm, and also those I came across, those I was mentoring. It just became more and more exciting to me. There's something about the challenge of finding the wild in the city and the kind of wild-mindedness, which I so value. It became a really creative pursuit in like, what are the different modalities and ways that can draw that out of me and others? So it really was a kind of live experiment with myself and others, and a lot of fun. And of course, it really just gave me permission to play in the way that I like to play and to live in the way I like to live.
Yeah. Well, gave yourself permission and to do it. And then, as you point out, others are important. I think some of us tree huggers get a little bit like it's us and nature, and it's so beautiful and enriching to have time in nature alone, that it's important to remember the community, the human community we're a part of. And I'm already taking notes and thinking about all the different places this could go. But the first thing I want to ask you is, seeing as you were your own guinea pig,
yes,
what was your kind of top things you found ways
Yeah.
of doing this stuff?
I mean, I guess they feel like they're in kind of a couple of different camps. One is the kind of an actual nature observation and awareness. So quite literally opening up my senses in the way I just used to live when I was living in the bush.
Yeah.
And approaching and encountering and almost like assuming that the landscape I lived in the city was a wild landscape, wildish enough to have wholeness and diversity.
Nice.
And actually cultivating curiosity about what's actually going on here.
Mm.
And the kind of cornerstone of that is finding a spot which we call a sit spot, to go and sit as often as possible and to kind of be the foundation for that observation.
Mm-hmm.
And the observation, you know, it really reaped rewards. You know, I peeled off layers and layers of what's actually happening, you know, with creatures you don't always see, not just the raucous lorikeets or the pigeons or, you know, what you kind of like immediately see, but deeper and deeper layers of that. And, you know, that's such an enriching realization and experience to kind of see, there's all these creatures living all around us and in our homes and around our homes and, you know, in invisible ways. And edible plants and medicinal plants, it's everywhere. So that was one kind of part of it, is like becoming more ecologically literate and encountering the landscape as a wild landscape. And part of that is just the really simple practices I keep coming back to of, you know, actually hands-on engagement with the landscape. So in the city, that for me was a lot of foraging, you know, foraging fruit and wild edibles, whether they're indigenous edibles or weeds. And there's something for me about incorporating food and the foraging of food into my daily routine, that is just so deeply connective. You know, it's that, like, this landscape can support my existence. And in one of the early lockdowns a couple of years ago, a friend and I went on what we called a hunter gardeners challenge, where we decided to eat only from food that we had grown or foraged in the city kind of environs, or that friends had grown and foraged and we could barter or swap. And it was actually such a fantastic experience in community sufficiency. You know, we were so well fed on the stories and the connections. Like, we were there in lockdown, getting around on our bikes, being offered food, and hearing stories from people in their experiences of lockdown. And it was such a feast for all the parts of me that were craving connection in that time.
Yes. Well, I mean, obviously the social connection at that point would have been fundamental to basic mental health. You know, we had our lockdowns, but nothing like Melbourne. Sure. Where I live. But, and, you know, eating well and eating good stories, or being nourished by good stories, that sounds like something that would be really nourishing in general. But the food side of it, just out of interest, because I did a locavore experiment over here, South Coast, New South Wales. I foolishly did it right in the middle of winter, which was the easiest time to do it. But I live in a very bountiful area because we have the estuaries, you know, the fresh water coming down from the mountains, and we have the coast. And I've taken up a fair bit of, you know, hunting and foraging also. But pretty easy out here. But what were some of the highlights of doing that in an urban area?
I mean, I had the kind of basic storehouse of my chickens for eggs. And honey from my bees.
Nice.
And we were gifted some farm-grown lamb from just in the outskirts of Melbourne. So there was some basic kind of proteins. I think one of the highlights was just, you know, going on my daily walks, and I've got quite a few loops around here, but going out with that need to find food, I discovered so much more about those daily walks that I go on, like the hidden abandoned gardens and the potatoes and the different the kangaroo apples that were fruiting at just the right time. And it opened my eyes. So having that kind of lens of what could I really, how is this landscape amenable to supporting my existence? That lens opened up a whole new kind of world for me in terms of what was possible.
Yeah. It sounds to me like I would almost feel, I won't try and speak for you, but I feel an aspect of thankfulness in that, like, walking around and seeing these things that are, in some ways literally just fruit for the plucking in the classic gatherer tradition of just, seeing some wild potatoes or something like that. But just also in that way that I think in this kind of field, I said before we came on, I'd like to speak really loosely about ecotherapy. For me, it is about us feeling like healthy parts of a living ecosystem.
Yes.
And I feel like, that focus on what's going to nourish you physically, at that basic level of food it is still a type of nature talking, though, if we're aware. Yeah, it's like you're listening, you're really opening your perceptions to what's in your ecosystem as you're walking around thinking about what's going to nourish you next.
Definitely. Yeah, there's friends of mine who really inspired this to a whole new level for me. They go by the name of Artist as Family.
Oh, I follow them.
Yeah, they've written a book called The Art of Free Travel, and they live a lifestyle that they call neo-peasantry, which is kind of permaculture to the next level in a way. And it's really kind of mixing that sense of the domestic and the cultivated and the wild. And they're really only reliant on the monetary economy 30%. They live in a 1/4 acre block in Daylesford. So
I've always wondered, actually, because I follow their imagery and what they're doing. I think I really appreciate it, but I actually didn't know where they were from.
Yeah, they live in a 1/4 acre block in Daylesford, and so they really try to take responsibility for the bulk of their life support systems, like heating, fuel and food, etc., water. And they really inspired this kind of ethic of it's like homesteading, but it includes a wild aesthetic. It includes a wild element. So that's also foraging and becoming literate in medicinal and edible plants and fungi and some hunting. And that for me is, I mean, when I guide people into a simple act of foraging, it's incredible how directly it seems to connect with our ancestral lifeways. It seems to connect with part of our nervous system, which needs to know, like thrives on our ability to be able to find food from the landscape, to be able to have some sense of self-reliance. It's like it's inbuilt in our nervous system.
Yes, I'm feeling a very solid intuitive response to your intuition there. That feels right. And of course, it's something that I've always loved to teach is recognizing that 90% of our cultural evolution took place in very close contact with nature, because all humans did, we only had that 10,000 years of urbanity. Sure, you can change everything in a generation, no doubt, and we're very changed people. But I think you're right to feel that you're tapping back into something there. It's not that deeply buried, right? You found that it comes forth fairly easily?
It really doesn't take much prompting or much drawing out. It's like some simple invitations and some guiding into some, very basic practices of self-reliance or earth skills or ancestral lifeways. And it's like, one of my mentors, John Young, calls it your connectivity system rather than calling it your nervous system. He said, we've got a connectivity system that is inbuilt for connection. Like as a toddler, we just send those tendrils out. We expect to connect with a myriad of different life forms. We expect to kind of be literate in these ways of the wild. And part of what I'm enjoying about more and more about incorporating these ways into the city and relying on different food sources here is it's like remythologizing our relationship with the ecosystem. So it's not about natives or non-natives. It's, it's really about what what is a kind of contemporary and relevant and practical relationship with our food systems right now. So, for instance, the oak trees just down the road from me, where I've gathered acorns in autumn and used, harvested them and used them for food, for acorn flour. Yeah. They're kind of part of my family in a way now. There's like mythology around the time of year that we can gather acorns and harvest acorns.
Nice.
So kind of bringing in a sense of like weaving in nature and culture, like re-mythologizing how our, the seasonal nature of our food sources and where they come from on the landscape, and how we can weave those into a kind of more, ritualized way of living on the land. That feels like the next level to me of kind of permaculture or neo-peasantry is bringing that kind of mythological and ritualized sense of, and that comes back to what you're saying, like it really amps up that sense of gratitude and thanksgiving and relatedness when we're not only taking from these plants and incorporating them into our diet, but we're recognizing them for what they are and what they provide on the landscape, what they provide for us, and strengthening those ropes of connection between us and other.
Yes. And that my ears are always going to tune up when I hear anything about re-mythologizing or that whole idea. And so what do you take when you talk about myth? I always try to make sure people understand we're talking about really powerful stories of deep connection, as opposed to, the exotic, the ancient. Myths should be something actually we live and breathe.
Yes.
Should be great stories. So I'm sensing you're feeling that space as well.
Yeah, and I guess, one example here is at Ceres, they brought in the festival or the ceremony of the return of the sacred kingfisher every spring.
One of those.
And in smaller ways, we're doing that with, the acorns on the oak tree, or other aspects of the landscape that kind of have they feel like heritage species, because they're so they're so related to our human existence. So I'm meaning mythology here in a sense of, bringing the significant, like highlighting the significance of these species in our life and incorporating that into a kind of ritualized way of being, which deepens the relatedness.
Yeah.
And of course it involves like researching their mythological place in a pan-cultural way, like what are oak trees in other cultures, and how does that relate to how we encounter them here? And so, taking a contemporary look at how we re-mythologize species.
And as you say, re-ritualize too. It's really important. I always try to bring that aspect in too. When we think of ritual, what do we think of? It really can start with the most simple way of just opening your attention to the moment, being thankful and trying to come to presence and ask what else can we be aware of? What more can we be aware of? Ritual works for that opening of perception in very simple ways, right? It's almost just if we put a little bit like what you said about how food woke people up. If we turn our attention around, these things are actually there all the time.
They are. And again, it doesn't take much. It's not like you need big bells and whistles to kind of, bring some ritual and hence some shift in perception into our life. Like a couple of years ago, we held a 24-hour ceremony down here at the fire circle right on the Yarra at my place in Melbourne, that was marking the ceremony of Samhain, the Celtic ceremony of Samhain, which is, Halloween in the Northern Hemisphere. For us, it's early May. And to ritualize it this time of year, we just created some really simple guidelines around how to engage with the fire, how to engage with kind of entering the circle and leaving the circle, and really just that invitation that this is a 24-hour held space, held container with a sacred fire that's tended to, a place to share stories, to, there was an altar for the ancestors. You could put photos of your ancestors there, light candles, share tears and stories and laughter and some food just that in itself, really simple, some simple kind of principles or guidelines to hold a ritual space, and magic happens in that space. You know, there was a moment I remember where there was probably about 60 or 70 people sitting down by the fire after dusk, and this tawny frogmouth just came and landed in the tree right above the fire, just soaking it all in.
Yeah. It's unusual to see them clearly. So that was an auspicious moment. And speaking of auspicious moments in Samhain, we're actually speaking today literally on the winter solstice.
We are. Yes, we are indeed.
Southern Hemisphere, which I don't remember either of us actually
acknowledging or
scheduling, but here it is. And, my PhD was on light, like the idea of how we focus around light and what meaning we give it to, including things like campfires, as well as iconic imagery of gods and goddesses and so forth. I really learnt how much it can actually ground us back in our appreciation of being present, embodied beings in the here and now, as opposed to in that abstract symbolic world that I think we sometimes think of when we think of something like light or archetypes or whatever. It really is about living, breathing, as you've shared in a couple of different ways now, sharing with others. And time of year.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredibly enlivening for me to be tuned into the seasonal changes and the seasonal indicators, and to mark them in some small way. Like today, it might be quite simply lighting a little candle or a fire, or and one practice I'm trying to get kind of bedded in or better at the moment is tuning to where the moon is in the sky at any one time, especially when it's invisible. So just for those simple things for me, and just noticing those incremental changes in light in the morning as the seasons pass, it enlivens me. It's such a fast, efficient, powerful doorway into a sense of a larger sense of self, a larger sense of belonging.
That's really great. So let's go with that, as opposed to, again, the 6 other sparky directions the last few minutes could have taken us in. But you've landed somewhere I think is really important in terms of the broadest possible sense of ecotherapy, which is, you've used the words enliven, which I think is an exciting word, and I think it should be, and then also grounded. So, also a really good combination. And just before I ask you to go on, come back around those and work that space around a little more, I'd have to say a few months ago, so probably just as summer was turning away earlier in 2022, I woke up to a really powerful dream at 4:30, which basically I was in a 4-wheel drive, and the guy that was driving it had just found a whole extra set of gears that didn't exist before. And I woke up with this really quite clear read, that it was like, wow, you're about to get an extra gear. And sure enough, I woke up at 4:30 on the dot for like ages after that. And still since then, I've noticed that when I wake up earlier, I'm very comfortable with it. It's almost like that's a part of my thing now, which is great for me. I get a couple of extra hours in the morning. But what happened out of that was I went to my spot, my early morning ritual spot, similarly, I'm sure, with practices of your own, and noticed that Venus was like directly in line with the third eye from when I did like the serpent pose on my yoga mat. Amazing. And then we've had this fabulous alignment ever since. So I've been tracking the planets in the morning, the Venus, Jupiter, Saturn and Mars were at one point quite close together, but even now, tracking them over weeks and over months is really fun for me now. And I really get a feel for way the ancients, read the sky as a way of, enlivening themselves in the here and now. So you've been doing that with the moon, quite a similar thing we've both been tapping into in a way. What's a way you feel like, I guess what I want to come back around to, what excited me about where you were going was, what's ecotherapy good for? Like, on the one hand, we want to talk about the basic level of dealing with anxiety, depression, senses of isolation and so forth. But once you once you've worked through that material, and of course for some people that's okay, that's exactly what they need to be doing, so whatever's right in the moment. But I'm also always sort of looking as well for what is it that it can just give you. You're just walking down the street. It's not necessarily like you're feeling your inner child wound or you're dealing with a manic episode or anything. It's like, what's that enlivening and grounding thing we can get out of being attuned to nature?
Yeah, great question, because of course what I hear in that question is, the difference between healing work and holing work, because of course all of us have a bulk of healing work to do, and that's a lot of the things you just spoke of, the wounded children, the fragmented parts, the subpersonalities that really need attention, and sometimes at different points in our life they need a lot of our attention. But then there's also holing, which is really coming into more of our potential, coming into strengthening our facets of wholeness, if you like. Bill Plotkin talks about this in his book, Wild Mind, these different facets of wholeness, one of which he talks about is the wild Indigenous self, which is this archetype of the original, raw, wild, kind of untamed, uncivilized part of us, which is also one of the most suppressed parts of us in Western culture. Yeah. And this is the part that's completely at home in our bodies, completely at home on our larger body of the earth, completely at home in the flow of our emotions, and loves a sensuous, connected way of being on the land. But so that's one of the archetypes or facets of wholeness that really come out in ecotherapy, is this part that just wants to belong to our bodies and our larger body, and our, we just let it all in, and we follow the animal instinct in us.
Who wants to belong, and as you've been pointing out, who can belong quite easily if we allow it.
Sure, if we allow it.
So it is something that's really important for people to know they can find, right? Because a lot of people are out there, they've been pretty well socialized into an urban modern society. They might not have even come across the idea of this wild inner self that
no, that's right. And in some level they feel the longing for that, but it can be, misexpressed in various ways.
Yeah, of course.
But I guess the other part I wanted to bring out in that question, Geoff, is the kind of link between nature connection and our gifts, or how I understand, or how I've also observed in myself and others, when we start to feel a deeper and deeper sense of connection with the more than human world. Some might call it kind of eco-awakening, when we have a really not just intellectual but embodied knowing of ourselves as one strand in the web of life. Like we really feel that at a somatic level. Then what seems to start to shift, and I experienced this when I was mentoring people in the city, which I'll talk about in a moment. What I experienced is the shift is one of expansion and one of inquiry into, what am I really here for? What are the gifts that only I can bring to this world? So it moves from kind of needing to heal parts of self. It shifts into strengthening our capacity for connection. And then it seems to shift into this deeper yearning for understanding our own ecological niche. How can I give back to this earth community that I'm a part of? What are the gifts that are only mine, that are unique for me to offer? And so this is where you see people starting to want deeper immersions, longer immersions, rites of passage kind of programs or experiences like Vision Quest. And start to really move towards those deeper states of immersion. And when I was mentoring a bunch of people in Melbourne here, we called them the Rewild Fridays program. So it was pretty much ecotherapy, but it's also village therapy. And when you can combine ecotherapy and village therapy, for me, that's when things really start humming.
Great.
And the premise was really simple. It was a bunch of people, maybe 12 people, that we got together in an urban parkland in Melbourne every Friday, most Fridays for about 2 years. People came and went a bit, but there was a core group. And we would engage in nature observation awareness, earth skills, village building, village technologies like circle time, sharing our stories of time in nature. So it was hands-on, but it was also reflective. And what I started to experience with this group was very quickly they developed strong kind of connective threads to the places that we were visiting. They started doing some of the practices at home, which built their sense of belonging at home. Some of them started, got off their antidepressants and started kind of making changes in their life, looking at different vocations. And the support that came through the kind of witnessing of each other over many months really led to felt like a generative capacity for these people to ask those deeper questions of their life. So moving from the kind of survival mode to the thrival mode of like, wow, we've actually got enough connectivity in our life here that we can start to kind of expand into our potential.
So nice. I haven't heard that one yet, Claire. From survival to a thrival. Nice. And doing the stuff at home. I'm constantly on about this, like I've presented the ecotherapy work at shorter things like, yoga retreat weekends and things like that. And of course, public presentations, which always leave me feeling a bit like, the core message I want to drive home is but you can do this at home. When you do a short thing, you're always worried people will get their little blip of eco off you and then that's it. It doesn't really change anything.
Yes.
When I heard you say, people would start to get off of antidepressants, but for me, even more importantly, just start to do the stuff at home, integrate it into the way they are in the world.
Yeah, that's right. And bring their families into it and just start to kind of live it in more of a daily sense. It's not something you just switch on when it's workshop time and switch off. And I guess that's part of the beauty of being able to practice outdoors is it lends itself more to ways of integrating it at home.
Right on. And you mentioned before you were going to come back to, and I think this might be a nice time if it's okay to do that, to mentoring people in the city, just to take that one another step further too. So you had your Fridays for a couple of years. That's great. Again, seeing people taking things home, that's something I really want to support, doing it themselves, really opening themselves to being, an aware part of their ecosystem. Out of the book, and I'll put the link up to the book at the end, what do you think might have been, the top practical tips out of that help people feel connected regardless of where they're living and what they're doing?
The top practical tips. I mean, one of the really most joyful practices that it almost just gives permission for people to do what they know they want to do anyway.
That sounds like a good start.
Is to leave the device at home and wander into the landscape. And when I say landscape, it could just be out the back door, into the suburbs or into the parkland with no fixed agenda.
Right, just wander.
It's really just as simple as leaving everything behind and opening up to that kind of sense of wandering. Wander where, switching on the body radar, that sense of the body knows where it wants to go.
Nice.
Maybe there's a spot that you want to sit or a spot that you want to maybe there's a tree you want to climb. It's really letting that childlike sense of wandering, no time, no destination. We're not out there for we're not trying to do anything. And it's letting the mind wander as much as the body.
So meditative.
It's meditative. It's like a dynamic meditation. We're walking a lot slower. Maybe we're walking barefoot. We're opening up our senses. We're kind of opening to synchronicities too. Because my feeling is when we really put ourselves in a landscape that's outside four walls and we're quite simply open and receptive, things start happening. Things start, patterns start emerging.
Yes, possibly the kinds of patterns that we've been suppressing because we have to go in the car to work, in the building, follow the straight lines. And it's something I love to help people to remember is, you know, when you're looking at a city, you see so many straight lines, so much black bitumen and cement and glass and everything, that isn't it fun every now and then? And I'm a big lover of walking barefoot, but you know, even if you're in town and you've got your nice shoes on, of actually just visualizing that landscape without the grids and the cement and the buildings and everything, and sensing, you know, even just walking slightly uphill or choosing, you sort of suggested towards this, you know, in following your nose where you walk. I've noticed even little things like whether you turn left or right or go slightly uphill or slightly downhill, they almost match something you're feeling, you know, like I need to drive up that, I need to walk up that hill, or I need to just take it easy today.
Yeah.
I think that's partly where the synchronicities come out too, you know. You're actually choosing, without really thinking about it, a certain way to feel as you walk, even if it is a city block.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. You know, it's allowing our bodies to be wild instruments of intelligence as well, you know, capable of being really sensitive, sensitized creatures to the landscape and telling us things, guiding us, and in conversation with the land. So it's getting out of the head, back into the body. And really, you know, the times that the numerous encounters I've had, not numerous, but numerous encounters I've had here on the land in the city have been where I've really been in that wandering mind and really let my body just guide me to where I, you know, need to go. And that's when I've had encounters with foxes and owls and all sorts of creatures and landforms.
Wonderful. And, you know, and we've come back around a little bit to it again. Something I always love to pick up on, if I can, is that conversation with nature, which really happens as soon as we start listening and sniffing and, you know, tapping into the other senses, even just feeling the gravity of which way we want to walk. And then, you know, you do get to read things, right? You talked about a fox and an owl, and those are really quite almost, I guess you'd say, iconic nature creatures. But I have to admit, sometimes I really, really like the little things. And, you know, a sit spot is so good for the little things.
Yes.
Like watching an ant or a worm even. I know I'm having a lot of connection with my earthworms lately. I put something in the compost this morning and the whole top of the compost was like writhing with worm life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and yeah, just an example. Just yesterday, I was sitting with I do some one-on-one work with people, and if the weather's fine enough, I encourage us to be outside because it opens us to those kinds of synchronicities. She was just describing coming across this bird that kind of blew her away with its beauty, and it was an eastern spinebill, and she talked about, you know, this great joy in discovering the eastern spinebill at her sit spot. And before you know it, an eastern spinebill had flown in, perched on the branch right above her and started singing away. And it just felt like such an affirmation of the track that she was following.
Yeah, wonderful. Oh, that's really sweet. Yes, a very similar thing happened to me just the other day. I had to drive north from here, and just one of those classic moments, just thinking about, in fact, the fox, which you just mentioned. So here's our own little synchronicity coming out. I cannot anymore remember the path of thought I was on, but I just thought about the fox and then came around the corner and saw, you know, it's roadkill, which is always a shame to see. But it was just that similarity of just right in that time, you know, and Jung tells the famous story of the scarab beetle that landed on a window when he was talking to a client that was quite resistant and really not wanting to allow the magic. So, you know, I love the fact that you've gone pretty much straight to that. You've talked about that a few times now, the magic, the synchronicity.
Sometimes, I guess that's the thing. We think those things only happen when we're in special workshop places or peak experiences or out in wilderness areas. But I guess this is part of the rewilding sense of the wild mind, or the psyche the size of the earth, is knowing. And if we assume and we really expect to be stirred and touched and and moved intimately by the more than human world, we start to take notice of that, and how, you know, that our thoughts and our emotions as they move through us are not separate from what's happening in the wider realms around us. And so your example speaks perfectly to that.
Yeah, it's that feeling of not separateness. I'm so glad you've come around to that, because I caught myself just as we were getting symbolic and meaningful there and thinking, yeah, but, you know, sometimes the most special things that happen to me in nature that wake me up are not actually meaningful or symbolic at all. It can just be the feeling of a light breeze that just happened to come from that direction and brush up against my cheek. It just wakes me up to this sense of aliveness to the beauty of nature without anything else but that. Just awareness of being and sensing, so that it's not just in the machine monkey mind box thing. It's, you know, if we're in nature and we're caught up thinking about our life, our human lives in that way, we can miss. So sometimes just the awakening of a tiny sensory perception can be.
That's right. And that's coming back to the beauty of the small things, which really is, you know, if we're sensitive to them and know that they're, you know, that they can be so enlivening, then it is that sense of like awe can come from just stepping out the back door and, you know, seeing the raven fly across the, you know, silhouetted against the dusk sky, or the flying foxes coming through in summer on their feeding route, or, you know, allowing ourselves to be stirred and moved and touched by these everyday routines of the wild creatures around us.
Really nice. You know, you're right. You can see a David Attenborough and watch like one of those massive migratory things on a big screen with great pixels and be really blown away. But actually you can see that just by starting to watch, just by being attentive to your own ecosystem. As you mentioned, the flying foxes going over, you know, we can't get those incredible visuals like you can with the you know, with expert cinematographers with unlimited budgets can provide us with. But you can get a sensation, you can experience yourself as part of a moving, living world, right?
Absolutely. And that's, you know, that brings me back into a memory of a conversation I had with Joanna Macy, who a lot of your listeners will know.
I was in a grief council with her last week.
Right. Amazing.
Big fan.
Incredible activist in California. And she was, you know, asked what's the most important thing that we can do? What's the imperative in these times? And it's to fall more deeply in love with the world.
There you go.
It's that simple and that profound. Because from that comes everything we've talked about. You know, it's all under that. It's all under that spell of, and it is like letting ourselves be re-enchanted, to be allured, courted by the wild other.
Yeah.
And encouraging others to do so, modeling that, bringing them into, you know, different ways of letting themselves be allured again. Which is really the enlivenment, you know, allured, courted, in love with, enchanted by the wild other.
Beautiful. This is this, you know, I'm hearing and feeling and coming across so many teachers at the moment that have just come back to this, and all the way from, you know, absolute legends like Joanna Macy to us. You mentioned John before, John Young. I just watched a video of him the other day. You know, actually I came across him through you all those years ago, but that was more about tracking. You know, it took me a while to understand that the tracking skills is like one level of it. And this enchantment, this enlivenment, this return to relationship is actually a deeper level of that same thing. And I'm coming across it all over the place. So it's really nice to hear you talk about that as well. Re-enlightenment,
and I guess
re-enchantment.
Practices like the sit spot or like tracking, you know, they start in a way being quite kind of like, this is this and this is what I'm seeing. But if we allow them to penetrate us, if we allow them to sink in it becomes more of a holistic tracking, which becomes more of that enchantment. But, you know, for beginners, it really does start with like, okay, let's actually figure out what's out there. And then we start noticing the patterns and the changes. And, you know, after 7 years here at this particular place and 7 years at my sit spot, now I know when the black cockatoos or the gangs come in winter, down from the mountains, down to the lowlands, through this valley here. And, you know, that's it grows more and more enchanting each year. I notice it.
Yeah.
There's something about the going like deeper and deeper into the beauty of those seasonal indicators and the predictability of it.
Yeah, which is not, it's predictable in that seasonal way, and the way all the signs come together. As Deborah Bird Rose, the great anthropologist teacher, showed us. She was really good on the, helping us to understand those Australian Aboriginal calendars that are like, more like when you see the yam daisy flower, the crocodile eggs are ready to harvest, rather than dates. Yeah, it's a flow. It's a flow where everything actually can come together in a lot of really beautiful ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautifully said.
Well, same to you. That's been a fantastic conversation. I'm so amazed. I've got my page of notes, but that's okay. I'll do what I will with those. I'll probably just flick across them one day, or maybe I'll try and set up a little reflective piece for people who are watching this to say, here's a reminder of some of the questions or notes or suggestions that have come out of the conversation with Claire that they can pick up on again. But just looking at this, I feel like we almost covered everything, Claire, in less than an hour.
Oh, we did well. Yep. No, it touched on all the
good stuff.
Important places.
Observation, awareness, presence, wildness, love, holding, connection, conversation.
Just as you rattle off that list, I have such a sense of gratitude that this is the work that I'm involved in that feels so important, meets my needs and the needs of the times, which is really such a privilege to find myself in that place.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's great that I feel very, very thankful for the ways things have turned, but I guess also just happy that I stayed focused on this kind of stuff. I didn't let the allurements, the other allurements, the sort of modern
distractions,
urban ones, take me away from that deeper sense of awe. Was a word you threw in there at one point too, really important word. And just simple in loveness.
It's a great place to end.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Thanks a million for talking to us, Claire. And I look forward to catching up again soon.
Me too. Thank you.
Okay, ciao.
Thanks for watching, and please consider liking this video. And if you want more content like this, subscribe, and the Nature Calling bell will toll for you. This is Geoff signing off.